In the year 1571, the Islamic world and Christendom clashed on the brutal waters of the Gulf of Patras in one of the greatest naval battles of the medieval era, the Battle of Lepanto. Over 400 warships, tens of thousands of rowers, archers, and soldiers shed blood for honor, faith, and power. Amid cannon smoke and blood-dyed waves, there were those who were forgotten, the defeated, the broken, the souls who survived, but were never truly freed. Tonight, you will become one of them. You are an Ottoman archer, wounded and captured after the battle, shackled to the oar of a Venetian galley. Each stroke cuts deeper into memory. But when fire breaks out below deck and destiny opens a strange path within the belly of the ship, you must choose to die a prisoner or live on as a legend. If you love stories that pull you deep into history, where you don't just watch, but become part of it, then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Now take a deep breath and begin the night's journey in the dark hull of a ship bound by fate. Ash on the horizon, curling like the breath of a dying beast, blots out what little sun remains in the afternoon sky. The air is not just smoky, it tastes of something scorched and human. That's the first thing you feel as you drift up from the edge of unconsciousness, the grit of burnt canvas and gunpowder at the back of your throat, like you've swallowed the battlefield itself. Then pain. Your left shoulder pulses a fire blooming beneath the skin. It's not just bruised, it's torn. You remember the jagged slice of something sharp, maybe a saber, maybe a splintered oar during the final clash before everything went dark. You try to move and hear the unmistakable scrape of iron on wood. Chains. Not thick, cruel shackles, just enough to humiliate and bind. Your wrist is clamped to a post along a damp, ribbed floor of curved planks. You're below deck. The stink of bilge water and sweat and other men's fear assaults you before your eyes adjust. You are not alone. Row upon row of other men slouch in the half-light ankles bound to benches' wrists, to thick wooden oars, polished dark by salt and misery. The timbers creak with the ship's slow rock. A thin sliver of light dances through the seam in the hull, a pale reminder that there's still a sun out there somewhere above the blood-flecked waves. The clatter of boots interrupts your haze. Venetian voices bark from above, sharp consonants nasally vowels. You don't know the words, but you've heard the tone before. Orders issued like whips. One of the guards descends armored in overlapping iron plates with a rust-red sash tucked into his belt. His eyes sweep across you and the others like you're livestock he's debating how to cook. You try to sit up straighter, but the pain in your shoulder says no. Instead, you lean your head back against the wooden post and breathe through your teeth. You're alive. That much is clear. And you're on a Venetian galley, one of the hundreds that raked across the Gulf just days earlier during the thunderous storm that history will call Lepanto. Whether your side calls it a tragedy or a lesson depends on who's left to tell the tale. You remember flashes, smoke so thick it turned day to dusk, the roar of cannons you never saw, the face of your comrade Ibrahim split open like a melon. You saw his eyes roll back while he still gripped his bow. You tried to reach him. Instead, something hit you. Not a sword, not a bullet. It felt like the ship itself reared up and kicked you, hurling you into the mass of clashing bodies. And then nothing. You blink slowly as the galley groans. It's underway. Not at full speed, just enough to make the sea slap rhythmically against the hull. You feel the pulse of oars beneath you. Not yours. Not yet. But soon, the chain tightens slightly as another prisoner tries to shift. He hisses in your direction, whispering in broken Turkish, "Don't move too fast. They'll beat the ones who do." You turn toward him. A thin man, maybe Greek or Arab. His eyes are sunken, his lips blistered. There's an odd calm in his voice, as if he's resigned to all of this. You don't answer. You don't need to. The silence says everything. Footsteps above again. The trap door opens. A tall figure descends slowly, different from the others. Not just a guard. This one wears a deep green cloak, his face partly obscured by a mask of damp linen. He glances at each of you, then stops at your bench. His eyes, ice pale and sharp, meet yours, and for a brief moment you feel less like a man and more like an animal at market. He speaks in low melodic Latin, some form of prayer or curse, maybe both. Then he dips a cloth into a basin of cloudy water and reaches for your arm. You flinch. He doesn't stop. Instead, he mutters something, presses the wet cloth to your shoulder, and begins cleaning the wound. Pain flares white behind your eyes, and you nearly vomit on the floorboards. But you grit your teeth. He's not gentle, but he is precise. "Archer," he says in slow, accented Turkish. "Still use bow." It's not a question. It's a test. You nod. He nods back approvingly. You don't see him again that day. Later, as the sun begins to fall, the ship lurches forward with purpose. The cadence of the rowers intensifies. You are unshackled briefly. A long oar is shoved into your blistered palms, its grip worn smooth. You know the rhythm already. Every galley beats to the same cruel drum. Pull, pull, breathe, pull. The pattern becomes a chant. The chant becomes time. You lose track of days after that. Sometimes above deck you hear laughter. You hear metal clinking on plates, the soft clatter of boots. Even music, once violins or some stringed thing you can't name. It echoes down through the deck like a ghostly lullaby meant to mock you. One morning, if it is morning, a seagull lands briefly near the hull's slit. You hear it squawk and remember something odd. Your mother's fingers threading a bowstring with wax, the way she said it had to hum like a sparrow's cry. You never thought much of it at the time, but now you see the symmetry. Pull, breathe, pull. The man beside you coughs blood, a red foam on his lips. No one notices. No one can afford to. Death is not dramatic here. It's not tragic. It's background noise. You keep rowing. At night, your sleep is shallow. You dream of crescent moons, blood red and burning. You see the faces of men you killed, and men who killed you one piece at a time. You wake to pain in your wrist, the cuff biting your flesh, and yet strangely, it is not despair you feel. It's something else. The odd awareness that you are still here. That something waits. Some hinge in the story has not yet turned. Once during a lull, you hear the words Lepanto spoken above, followed by laughter. They think it's over. They think it's history. They have no idea that history has not even begun to decide who matters and who doesn't. You were there. Not as a general, not as a hero, as a boy with a bow. A fisherman's son turned soldier turned prisoner. And as your sore hands pull again, you feel your wound stretch and throb but not split. That's good. That's survival. The galley jerks, suddenly turning toward shore maybe, or just adjusting to wind. You glimpse a tower through the slit in the hull. Far off. Maybe Corinth. Maybe not. Geography has blurred into legend, but one thing is clear. You are not meant to die here. Not yet. The wood creaks. The wind shifts. And somewhere beneath the stench of sweat and sea rot, you smell something else, burnt oil maybe, or sulfur. You blink. Above you, the beams creak louder than usual. You file it away. Not panic, not yet. You've seen fire before, and you have a feeling you'll see it again. The rhythm of the oars becomes your second heartbeat, slower than the one thudding in your chest. but heavier, more final. Every pull sends a quiet tremor through your arms, your ribs, your wounded shoulder, and the chain clamped to your wrist rattles in that hollow metallic voice that belongs more to the ship than to any man aboard. There's no point in resisting. You already know that. These benches have broken stronger men. Some resist only once enough to get their teeth knocked out or their fingers smashed with the flat of an officer's blade. Others don't resist at all. They simply drift into the rhythm until they no longer remember the name of the land they came from. Or worse, they forget why they ever cared to remember it. You row beneath the weight of a ship that's not yours, toward a horizon that doesn't belong to you. The sea slaps in lazy percussion outside the hull, and the wood of the oar, worn smooth by years of desperate palms, seems to whisper the ghosts of every hand that clutched it before yours. Some of those ghosts are still here beside you, behind you, ahead breathing, groaning, sometimes crying in the dark when they think no one hears. But you hear them. Always. Time once a reliable river has become a knot. You no longer know how many days have passed since you were dragged aboard. You only know that each day has tasted like salt, sounded like chains, and ended in the sour stench of shared sickness and shallow sleep. Occasionally someone dies, usually quietly. When that happens, the oar beside you falls slack. Someone else is chained to the bench before long. The dead are taken above deck but not buried. Not right away. Not until the smell begins to interrupt the rhythm of labor. And even then, there are no prayers, no rites. Just the sound of a body hitting water and a splash that no one watches. You've come to understand that this galley, like all galleys, is not merely a ship. It is a mouth that chews through men, grinds them down to bone and memory, and spits them into the sea when their strength is spent. And still, you row. There is no sail above you. You're beneath deck in the lowest, most infernal part of this floating prison, where no sunlight reaches and no breeze offers relief. You exist in a cave made of tar and timbers, held together by pitch and habit. Occasionally, someone above opens the hatch to shout an order or haul up a prisoner for punishment. The light that floods in when this happens is blinding. Not beautiful. Just violent. Like the sun is a punishment too. You've learned to count the day. By sounds, the shifting of boots overhead, the moments of silence before a cannon is tested. The shrill voice of the officer, whose job it is to make sure the chain of men beneath him keeps moving. You don't know his name. He doesn't know yours. He calls you bastardo, which seems to be his preferred insult for everyone who doesn't speak his language. Sometimes he spits when he says it. You've considered spitting back, but only in fantasy. In reality, your tongue is too dry for that kind of rebellion. There is one word you do hear regularly, though, and you know what it means: remare. Row. It's not a request. It's not even an order. It's an inevitability, like breathing or bleeding. You hear it, and your arms move, even if they ache. Especially if they ache. On the 5th or perhaps 15th day of your captivity, something unusual happens. The beat of the drum that marks your rowing halts. Briefly. A strange quiet follows, broken only by the creaking of the hull and the shuffle of confused feet. Then voices urgent, unfamiliar, many of them speaking not the usual Venetian tongue, but something more elegant, more deliberate. Latin. The hatch opens again. For a moment, the shaft of light is so bright that you wince. Then a figure lowers himself into the galley. He's not a soldier, not a captain, not a jailer. His robe is dark and flowing, embroidered with faint gold thread that glimmers in the low light. A crucifix swings gently from a chain around his neck, and his skin, while olive-toned like yours is washed pale by candlelight. His face is lined not by war, but by thought, and his eyes dart over each chained man with something between pity and resignation. He's a priest, not one of those laughing, wine-soaked monks who walk among nobles and flatter them with tales of heaven. This one looks like he's seen too much hell to be surprised by anything anymore. He speaks to the guards, gesturing toward the rowers, then says something that sounds like misericordia. You don't know Latin, but you've heard that word before, mercy. He kneels beside one of the men 3 benches ahead of you, mutters a few solemn words, then raises a small silver cup to the man's lips. The rower drinks, then coughs, then sags forward as though the weight of the prayer was heavier than the weight of the chains. The priest continues down the line, touching foreheads, muttering Latin blessings, leaving a faint trail of incense and oil in his wake. When he reaches you, he pauses. He studies your eyes, and you see his widen slightly. You are not Venetian, he says softly, switching to broken Turkish. You are Ottoman. You nod once wary. You have no reason to trust a man in robes, no matter how kind his face. Istanbul, he asks. You shake your head. Balıkesir, you rasp, surprising yourself with how weak your voice sounds. An archer. The priest looks at your arm, at the scabbed-over wound that now festers slightly beneath the filthy wrappings. He frowns, produces a small flask, and pours a bitter-smelling tincture over the wound. It burns. You wince. I was a teacher once, he says absently as he works. Before the Pope sent me to remind these men that they have souls. They have forgotten. He glances at the hatch above where the voices of drunken sailors carry down like distant thunder. Sometimes I forget too. He leaves without blessing you. Whether that's an insult or a kindness you cannot say, but you are left with something stranger than hope awareness. You've become part of a strange ecosystem. A place where priests bless prisoners, where language fractures and mends across pain, and where a wounded enemy is still an archer, even if his bow is ash. The next day, a boy is thrown below. Barely 16, perhaps younger. Hair like copper thread, face flushed with sun and shame. He's barefoot, bruised, and his clothes are too fine for a galley slave. The guards shout at him, laugh cruelly. One of them mimics the sound of a baby crying. The boy says nothing. He's chained near you. Not beside you, just close enough that you can hear him breathing hard, fast, like a sparrow trapped in a jar. You don't speak to him, not at first. But when the ship rocks violently that night, perhaps striking a reef or shifting in a sudden current, the boy cries out, a sharp, wordless noise. Fear not pain. You whisper, what's your name? He hesitates. Luca, he says at last, the name cracking in his dry throat. You're Venetian. He nods. Then why are you chained with us? He swallows. I was supposed to carry powder. Below deck. But I dropped it. During the fight. He shudders. It caught fire. You watch him quietly. You know what a powder fire does to a ship and to the people near it. The boy is lucky to be alive. Or perhaps not. Life here is a question without an answer. I'm not a soldier, he adds, almost as if to apologize. Neither am I, you say. That's not quite true, of course, but it is in spirit. In the days that follow, the two of you become a strange pair. You, the enemy archer with a half-healed shoulder, and too many ghosts in your eyes. He, the frightened powder boy, whose future was extinguished the moment the fire bloomed in his hands. You share no language well, but you share silence even better. Sometimes he hums a tune, a lullaby maybe. It's off-key and barely audible, but it reminds you of something your mother used to sing back when your night smelled of olives and dust and not tar and blood. You never thought you'd find music in a place like this. You tell Luca one night in halting Italian, I had a brother once. He nods, doesn't ask what happened. Smart boy. You feel it more than know it. The stars shift at night when you dare glance up through a seam in the deck above. The wind speaks differently. There's a tension in the crew's voices, a tautness in their gait. Something is coming, and though you cannot name it yet, you feel it curling in the corners of your bones, waiting smoldering. You don't know it yet, but fire will come again. And this time, it will not be a punishment. It will be your only chance. You wake to the low, gurgling groan of something large shifting beneath the hull, an underwater bellow, as if the sea itself has grown restless. For a moment, you are unsure if it was a dream, but then the galley tilts slightly enough to press your shoulder into the timber behind you. The man, chained 2 benches away, lets out a muted groan as his head lolls to the side, striking the post behind him with a dull thud. No one looks up. No one needs to. Everyone down here has grown so accustomed to the ship's caprices, its groans, its tilts, its sighs, that they no longer react like men, but more like animals who've grown used to the unpredictable humors of the cage that contains them. And truthfully, this is a cage, not a ship. You feel it every day. You breathe it, your arm still healing though. Healing may be too generous a word, throbs more intensely this morning. The crude bandage has slipped again in the night, and the cloth is now stiff with blood and a yellowish secretion that tells you what you already know: the wound is infected. The priest's tincture may have delayed it, but it did not stop the rot. You flex your fingers gently, testing how far the poison has spread. Your grip is still strong, but the pain now feels as if it radiates, not just from the gash itself, but from somewhere deeper inside the muscles and tendons that once pulled bowstrings taut with ease and grace. If this arm dies, you wonder what part of you dies with it. You look over to Luca. The boy has finally stopped shaking in his sleep. He's curled on the plank bench, using his own knotted sleeve as a pillow, his breath uneven, but not panicked. Sometimes he talks in his sleep. You've caught fragments, snatches of words like Mama Fuoco and once Perche whispered so faintly you thought it might be your own mind echoing back to you. Why? That was the word. Why? It's the same question you once asked when you stood ankle-deep in the dust outside your village, watching the older boys go off to train with the Janissaries, while your father shook his head and said nothing. Why him? Why not me? That question has followed you like a stray dog through every campaign, every arrow loosed, every breath between the hiss of war and the silence after. And now, chained in the belly of an enemy ship, rowing with men who would slit your throat if given freedom, the question still haunts you, but for different reasons. Why this? Why still? The day begins not with light, for there is no such luxury below deck, but with the usual chorus of boots slamming overhead, followed by the angry staccato of the overseer's orders. You've learned to recognize his steps, now the uneven cadence of a man whose left leg drags just slightly a consequence you suspect of some wound he earned in a different war. He limps with the authority of a man who survived enough battles to treat cruelty as efficiency. He doesn't shout because he needs to be heard. He shouts because he enjoys the sound of command. The trapdoor crashes open, and the draft of sea air that rushes in is almost intoxicating. For a moment, every man breathes deeper, hoping to catch a fragment of the world beyond the smell of salt, the scent of fish, the faintest whiff of sun-warmed wood. But it's fleeting. The trap slams closed again, and the dream evaporates. The world narrows to timber sweat and commands. This morning, there is no drumbeat. Instead, the overseer paces the rows of chained rowers slowly, almost thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing as he studies each face, each set of shoulders, each pair of hands. When he reaches you, he stops. He does not speak, but his gaze lingers. He glances at your bandaged arm, then looks at the oar you've just lifted into place for the morning shift. A grunt of vague acknowledgement escapes him, and then he moves on. That's all. But something about the pause unsettles you. A new calculation is happening in his mind. When the rowing begins, it is not with the usual urgency. Instead, the pace is slower, more methodical, a test of endurance rather than strength. The heat builds quickly despite the early hour. The enclosed space traps every exhalation, every droplet of sweat, until it feels as if you are breathing the lungs of the man next to you. The oar grows slick, your hands blister, and your shoulder begins to tremble from fatigue. But you do not stop. You never stop, because to stop is to be noticed. And to be noticed here is to invite pain. Hours blur together. You measure time not in minutes, but in oar strokes, in the number of times the ship creaks, in the intervals between when Luca's chains shift and when the man to your left coughs his guttural wet cough that has not improved in 3 days. You've counted it 77 strokes between each coughing fit. It's absurd, but it gives your mind something to hold on to. The mind must cling to patterns when the body has no freedom. Eventually, the overseer returns, not alone. This time, he brings a man you haven't seen before. His garments are finer, his beard short, and greased his boots clean despite the filth of the deck. He walks like someone used to command, but not to combat. A nobleman, perhaps. Or worse, an accountant. The kind of man who measures life in coin, not blood. The noble gestures at a few rowers. Then to your horror, he gestures at you. You're unshackled not roughly, but efficiently. 2 guards help you to your feet, and your legs nearly give out from the shift in posture. You have been hunched for so long that standing feels unnatural, like an animal trying to walk like a man again. Still, you manage to straighten though your balance sways. They lead you above deck. The sunlight strikes your eyes like a spear. You squint, hard tears welling up unbidden as your pupils rebel against the brightness. The world above is overwhelming. The wind rushes against your face with such force you gasp, and the sky, endless and blue, feels almost too large to bear. You forgot what color really was. The nobleman watches you closely. He mutters something to one of the guards who hands you a small leather flask. You lift it cautious. Water, cool and fresh. It runs down your throat like liquid salvation. You don't thank them. You don't speak. You just drink. Then you see what they've brought you to witness. Far ahead on the horizon, another ship burns. It's not one of theirs. It's Ottoman, one of your own, or what used to be. The black pillar of smoke rising into the sky confirms what the flickering flames suggest: powder caught fire or worse. You recognize the design of the hull even at this distance. The curve of the stern, the placement of the sails, it's unmistakably Eastern. You are made to watch it sink. It is, you realize, a message. Whether the nobleman knows your rank, your regiment, or merely your identity as an Ottoman, doesn't matter. The display is meant to break something inside you, to let you know that the sea is swallowing your past, your army, your people. And yet something else happens. As the ship burns, you feel the fire within you rise again. Not rage, not exactly. Something quieter, older. The memory of the bow in your hands, of standing on a ridge years ago, wind behind you, watching your arrow carve the sky like a truth. Your wound may throb, your chains may return, but the part of you that aimed has not been extinguished. It waits, patiently, quietly. They return you below deck after an hour, perhaps less. You are shackled again. Luca looks up as you're brought in, concern flashing in his young eyes. You lie down, not because you are weak, but because the sun left a mark on you. A mark of contrast. Above the world is enormous. Below, it is narrow. But you've seen both now, and that knowledge is power. You drift into sleep that night with your hand clenched faintly as if still holding a bow. You dream of a target. The air changes before the silence does. It is not something most of the men below notice, not immediately, not with the way their ribs rise and fall like bellows, nor with their backs curved perpetually in the same posture of submission, shoulders hunched like rooks in the rain. But you feel it. There's a subtle shift in the weight of the air itself, as if the salt has thickened or the breeze is now pushing from a slightly altered direction. You know the sea, like a living thing, it does not need to roar to speak. You lift your head eyes, adjusting slowly to the darkness you've grown used to. A drip echoes somewhere behind the rows of chained men, and the galley groans beneath you. Not the usual rhythmic creak of oars and hull, but something deeper. A tension in the beams, like a held breath. Outside, the sea is calm, but you recognize that calm for what it is. The kind that comes before the gods change their minds. Across from you, the man with the endless cough is quiet tonight. His breath is shallow, rattling faintly, the sound now no more than a shiver in the air. He stopped rowing 2 shifts ago, and nobody forced him to start again. That's usually a sign. Not of mercy, there is none here, but of inevitability. He'll be dead soon, and they'll simply cut him loose, toss his body overboard without ceremony. There's no mourning here, only momentum. You look over to Luca, who is quietly watching the same man. The boy doesn't say anything, but you can see it in his eyes. The question he's too afraid to ask aloud, will that be me? You could tell him the truth, which is that, yes, if he's lucky enough to survive the days ahead, he will still likely die like that, forgotten, coughing his body wrapped in shackles and old sweat. Or you could lie and say that he'll see Venice again, walk its streets in daylight, smell bread that hasn't been tainted by mildew and despair. But instead, you say nothing, because in this place, silence is the closest thing to truth. The ship rocks again, not violently, but enough that you feel it ripple through the oars, through the benches, through the flesh of every man chained to this floating engine of war. You've become something less than human and something more than prisoner. You are part of the ship now, just another tool in its arsenal. You row, not because they tell you to, but because if you stop, you disappear. When voices echo down from above, they carry a different cadence today. Laughter. Not the cruel barking kind, but something more relaxed, almost jovial. It's strange, disorienting to hear that sound while your ribs ache and your wound still weeps quietly beneath its crusted bandage. But what strikes you most is not the laughter itself, it's the language. You can pick out words you don't recognize, and others that are just familiar enough to confuse you. One man above is singing his voice, rolling lazily between pitches, something almost like a hymn, but not reverent, more like a tavern song borrowed from a monastery. It's Luca who first names it in a hoarse whisper, while the rowers pause briefly to eat Dalmatian. You glance at him. He shrugs. I heard the cook say it. We're sailing along their coast now, maybe to pick up soldiers or drop off the dead. He doesn't meet your eyes as he says it, and you realize with quiet sadness how quickly the boy has begun to speak like the rest of you, measured gray, careful with hope. You chew the stale bread they hand out in silence. Each piece is more stone than food, and the wine they offer now is sour enough to pucker your tongue, but it's warm, and that's something. It spreads through your chest like weak fire, a reminder that you are for now still among the breathing. Later that day, as the sun crests high above the deck, someone from above calls down a string of sharp commands. A new order. The guards descend into the galley not to beat or bind, but to choose. That's worse. Everyone stiffens. You can see the fear tighten across every shoulder, feel it ripple across every chain. There is something uniquely horrifying about being chosen in a place like this, because you never know what for. It might be a beating. It might be transfer. It might be something worse than either. You are chosen. Not first, but early. They point at you and motion upward. You rise slowly, muscles aching with that sick blend of fatigue and readiness, as though your body now assumes that pain is the beginning of every new task. You don't resist. Neither does the man they choose beside you, or the boy they take after that, Luca. His face drains of color when they gesture at him, but he doesn't protest. He looks at you as if to ask whether he should. You nod just once, and that is enough. Above deck, the sun slaps your skin like a punishment. The guards do not tell you where you are being taken. They merely nudge you toward the stern of the ship, where an assembly of officers, clerks, and strange civilians seem to be conferring over ledgers, scrolls, and maps that flutter faintly in the breeze. The sea is calm, glass-like in its stillness, but the air is thick with heat and humidity, the kind that settles into your bones and makes every breath feel like swallowing steam. Then you see a second vessel tethered to the galley, a smaller one, perhaps a supply ship or a transport boat. It bobs slightly in the current, loaded with barrels, crates, and a few figures in long robes, scribes perhaps, or missionaries. One of them carries a satchel that clinks when he walks. You are herded toward this ship along with the others, and only then do you realize what is happening. This is not punishment. It is movement, reassignment, trade. You glance at Luca. His face says what yours cannot: confusion, then fear, then resignation. The three of you are guided into the smaller vessel. Chains are removed only briefly, long enough to be switched to different iron cuffs, thinner, older, but no less cruel. The guards exchange documents with the robed men, and you catch a single word in Latin registro and another in Italian inventario. You are being cataloged, not as people, as assets. The smaller ship sets off shortly after cutting across the coast in a slow arc, the galley shrinking behind you. You have, in a strange way, been liberated not into freedom, but into a different cage, one that smells of herbs ink and something more acidic vinegar or embalming fluid. You sit in the bow with the others, exposed now to the sky for the first time in days, and it almost makes you feel weightless. Almost. One of the robed figures, a younger man with red-rimmed eyes and parchment skin, approaches you with a tablet and begins asking questions in slow, accented Turkish. Your name, your age, your rank. You lie about all of them. He doesn't challenge you. He simply writes down whatever you say, then moves on. Luca is next. When the man asks the boy his occupation, Luca hesitates, then says, "I was a baker's son, but they made me carry powder." The scribe nods, writes, and asks nothing more. Hours pass. The sky turns the color of rust as the sun descends. You feel the heat retreat slightly, replaced by a cooler breeze that snakes across the deck like a blessing. The coastline draws nearer, jagged cliffs and shadowed coves, a shoreline that looks more like a series of unfinished thoughts than a country. This is not Venice. This is not any place you recognize, but it is land. And after days below land, even the silhouette of it is something close to holy. When the ship moors in a shallow bay, you are not taken ashore. Not yet. Instead, the night settles and the robed men begin to sing. Not loudly, softly. Gregorian chants their harmonies, weaving through the rigging like smoke. It is haunting, beautiful even, and entirely wrong for this place. You listen in silence, bound and sore and uncertain, and somewhere in that vast, dark sky, the stars begin to emerge, blinking one by one like hesitant witnesses. You lie on your back that night, staring up through the gaps in the rigging, and think of your bow. Not the weapon itself, which was lost at Lepanto, but the act of holding it, the stillness before the shot, the arc of the arrow, the moment when silence bends. You remember what it felt like to draw breath and know that it mattered. You wonder if that moment will ever return. Luca sleeps beside you, curled up against a crate. The man from your galley coughs once, and then no more. Tomorrow, something will change. You don't know what, but the sea does. Dawn does not rise with splendor over the bay. There is no golden beam spilling across the water, no choir of gulls serenading the morning. Instead, light arrives reluctantly, filtered through a veil of gray clouds that smudge the eastern sky and turn the sea into a wide sheet of dull pewter. It is the kind of morning that does not announce itself, so much as seep into the skin, leaving everything damp and cold and indistinct. You sit upright before the others stir, already awake, already alert, your shoulders stiff from the night's chill and the unforgiving deck planks beneath you. Luca is still curled in sleep, his breathing shallow, but even his hand tucked under his cheek in a gesture that reminds you of a younger sibling, long gone now, whose face you can barely conjure except in fragments. A cheek pressed against a folded arm, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens, the laughter of cousins. You dismiss the thought, not because it lacks value, but because it has no place here. Sentiment in captivity is like keeping seeds in your mouth. Eventually, you'll either choke or be forced to spit them out. The men in robes rise with practiced efficiency, their sandals slapping lightly against the deck as they begin their quiet morning rituals. One of them, older, hunched with a spine bent like an archer's bow, left too long in the rain, begins to recite something under his breath, a prayer or inventory list you cannot tell. Another lights a small brazier near the bow and sets a kettle over it, the scent of boiled herbs and something acrid curling through the air. This is not a military ship, though it obeys military silence. It is something else entirely, something clerical, bureaucratic, and more terrifying in its obscurity. You realize, as you observe them, that these men live not by strength or faith, but by order. Everything here has its place. The names and the ledgers, the coffers of tinctures and wine, even the prisoners. You are not a soul to them, nor even an enemy. You are a number in a margin. Eventually, one of the clerics approaches you, holding a bowl of thin porridge. He does not speak, but hands it over with a nod, eyes focused not on your face, but on your wrists, more specifically on the fresh scabs where the iron has bitten through skin. You meet his gaze and hold it, forcing him to acknowledge you. And for a moment, he does. Just a moment. Then he looks away, turns, and continues down the line. It is in a strange way more degrading than open cruelty. You do not even inspire hatred. The porridge is barely warm, barely food, and yet you eat every spoonful. Not because it gives you strength, it doesn't, but because the act of eating is a form of resistance. You will not allow them the satisfaction of watching you wither. Not yet. By mid-morning, the small ship moors against a crude stone dock set into the curve of the bay. There is no bustling port here, no harbor master shouting over crates and gulls. Just a line of armed guards standing beneath a stone archway, their armor mismatched, their spears planted in the dirt like symbols of borrowed authority. Behind them, a compound stretches inland, a series of low buildings with faded red tile roofs, thick-walled and narrow-windowed, built more for security than hospitality. The flags flying above them bear no Venetian lion, no Ottoman crescent. You recognize neither emblem. That makes it worse. Unknown powers always demand more caution than familiar tyrants. You and the other 2 prisoners are unshackled just long enough to step ashore, then immediately bound again with fresh irons, thinner, newer, and cleaner. A man in a dark blue robe with a velvet sash inspects you like livestock, pressing his fingers into your shoulder with professional detachment. When you wince, he makes a note in a small leather-bound book. You want to ask what he's writing. Is it a death sentence? A medical note? A transfer order? But your throat remains closed. Luca walks beside you as you're led through the narrow gate into the compound, his steps hesitant, but even. You glance down at him once subtly. His face is drawn, the color sapped from his lips, but he does not look broken, only thin, worn like paper that's been folded too many times. You wonder how much longer he'll last. You wonder, too, how much longer you can afford to care. Inside the walls, the compound reveals itself to be a kind of monastery-turned-holding facility. You're led into a long hall, lined with stone columns, the roof arched and high with faded frescoes peeling overhead. Scenes of angels and battle saints and seas, all rendered in crumbling reds and ochres. It smells of old parchment oil and disuse. Here something strange happens. A tall, wiry man with a hawk's profile and deep-set eyes approaches the group. He is dressed simply, no gold thread, no armor, but everyone steps aside for him. He carries no weapon, yet walks like someone who needs none. He examines you with slow, deliberate interest, then speaks in impeccable Turkish. You were at Lepanto. It is not a question. You say nothing. I recognize the scars, he continues. The sunburn in the shape of rope knots. The shoulder wound, sword, not arrow. Sloppy. You're lucky to have kept the arm, or perhaps not lucky, depending on your purpose now. You still say nothing, but your jaw tightens. You are an archer. He adds more to himself than to you. Or you were. Still silence. The man nods as if your refusal to respond has confirmed more than words ever could. You'll work in the records room, he says at last. You can read. You nod slowly. Good, he replies, then gestures to a guard. Clean him up. Disinfect the wound. I don't want pus dripping on the manuscripts. You almost laugh. Almost. Luca is led away to a different wing, some kind of kitchen or storehouse, you presume. You want to follow to ensure he isn't thrown into something worse, but your chains tug you toward the stone corridor that leads deeper into the monastery. Every step echoes like a footfall inside a crypt. The room they bring you to is dimly lit, the air heavy with dust. Scrolls and ledgers line every wall, stacked in haphazard piles that seem one gentle breeze away from collapsing. An elderly man with trembling hands and thick spectacles nods absently at your entrance, then points to a bench beside a pile of unbound pages. Your work begins without explanation. Transcribe names, dates, entries written in 3 languages: Latin, Greek, and a strange dialect of Arabic. Your head aches after only an hour, but something happens as you copy those names. You begin to see patterns, lists of men captured, bartered, lost at sea, numbers tallied and scratched out, records of deaths with no bodies, transfers with no destinations. It becomes clear this place, this monastery, is not merely a waypoint. It is a clearinghouse, a ledger between worlds. Men come here to disappear, and their only remaining trace is ink. You find your own name. Not your real name, but the one the noble gave you on the Galley manifest: Harun Archer, shoulder injury value 2 silver. That's all. That's what you're worth here. And yet, you are still here. The irony is sharp and bitter. You were trained to fight for the glory of the Sultan, a thread in the great fabric of empire. Now you copy records for men who don't remember your name and don't care if you live to see the ink dry. And still, you persist. The wound on your shoulder aches less now. Either healing or numbing, either is acceptable. That evening, you are allowed to sit in the outer courtyard for 15 minutes under guard. The sky overhead has cleared. You look up, and for the first time in days, see the full, clean face of the moon. It is bone white and perfect, and it reminds you of your bow again, not just the weapon, but the curve, the poise, the stillness before release. You feel a kind of alignment stir inside you. Not hope, not yet, but direction. You will not remain a ledger entry. You will not disappear, not like the others. Night drapes itself slowly across the monastery, like a velvet curtain drawn by invisible hands, soft, complete, and absolute. The corridors darken in layers, not with sudden extinguishment, but with the deliberate fading of what little daylight dared to enter this place. The candles are lit one by silent novices, their thin frames swaying as they move robes barely brushing the stone floor. The monastery exhales a quiet hush, the kind of stillness not born of peace but of habit, of ritual, of a place where time does not pass, but accumulates. You sit in your assigned cell, if the word can be used at all for a space so narrow, it forces you to sleep curled like a rope coil, the ceiling pressing low above, and the walls so close your shoulders nearly graze them. There is no door, only a thick curtain of rough linen, and yet it feels like a tomb. You are given no possessions, save for a blanket too thin to shield against the night chill, and a small clay basin for water. But tonight, the cold does not bite as sharply. Your arm is still sore, the skin around the wound puckered and tight, but the pain no longer screams, it mutters. You know this is not healing. This is adaptation. The silence invites thought, and that is more dangerous than pain. You find yourself remembering small things you had buried your mother humming while grinding chickpeas. The way your father bent slightly to pick stones out of the fields, his hands forever smelling of iron and earth. Your younger cousin chasing dragonflies near the irrigation canal, her laughter high and sharp. These images do not come as comfort. They arrive like ghosts knocking quietly at the corners of your mind, reminders of a world that exists parallel to this one, impossibly distant now. In the distance, someone begins to sing. It's a sound that barely touches the edges of the night, low, untrained, and utterly human. It might be a prayer, or simply an attempt to ward off madness. You do not know the words, but the tune is familiar, ancient, even something from the southern isles where men still sing to the sea, as if it were a creature to be tamed. The voice cracks, but does not stop, and for a long moment, you let yourself listen. Not just hear, listen, and then very quietly, you find your lips moving, not to sing, but to whisper the verses you once knew. Turkish, not Italian, not Latin. A lullaby your mother used to hum when you had fever. It is a strange sound in this place, a foreign note in the song of stone and rule. But you murmur it anyway, low and hoarse, as though speaking it aloud might keep it from fading altogether. The next day, your work resumes with the same measured absurdity, transcribing the names of the already forgotten into books that no one may ever read. The elderly scribe beside you has begun to trust your hand. He no longer checks every page, only glances occasionally with a nod of faint approval. He speaks rarely, but nods toward your bandaged arm once and mutters something in Latin. You do not catch the full phrase, only the word, fortis strong. He does not say it kindly. It is not admiration, it is assessment. At midday, the doors of the outer hall are opened, and a new group is led in half a dozen prisoners from another garrison. They are emaciated, bruised, one missing a hand. The guards move them into the cells with grim efficiency, and then they are processed just as you were. You glimpse one of the ledgers that lists their names. Some are crossed out before they are even finished being written. Among them is a man with eyes like yours, brown, heavy, full of things he will not say. His beard is longer, streaked with white, but there is something familiar about his gait, the way he scans his surroundings with caution that has been carved into him by long years of battle. You recognize the bearing of a janissary, one of your own, or once your own. You do not approach him, not yet. That night, as you return to your cell, you notice something has changed. The linen curtain that serves as your door has been tied slightly off-center, leaving a gap just large enough to see out. It's small, intentional perhaps, or a careless mistake, but you sense something behind it. Not danger. A message. You do not sleep. Hours later, footsteps, a soft brush of robes, and then a figure appears in the gap, tall, robed face hidden in shadow. He does not enter. He merely stands there for a moment and says in near-perfect Ottoman Turkish, "Tell me if your right arm failed, could your left still draw?" You sit up slowly, heart hammering, not with fear, but with something stranger recognition. The question is not about injury. It is about intent, about identity. You say nothing. The man waits. Then he continues. There are still ships, not many, but enough. Some that answer to no empire. Some that remember what was lost at Lepanto and wish to speak one last word before they vanish. Still you do not answer, because something inside you has begun to wake some part that was content to be forgotten, content to rot in the corner of history's dark archive. He does not stay long. Before he departs, he tosses something through the curtain, a strip of leather, dark and frayed. When you pick it up later alone, you find it is a bow grip, worn to softness by years of use. Ottoman design. Yours no, but familiar enough to make your throat tighten. That night you do not sleep. The following day, you are called to the refectory, not to eat, but to serve. The kitchen is short-staffed, and someone has decided your arm is well enough to carry buckets and scrape trays. You are brought into the great hall, where clerics, guards, and visiting merchants take their meals. It is the first time you've seen so many of them gathered in one place, unarmed, unguarded, distracted by food and comfort. As you move between tables collecting scraps and rinsing vessels, you hear snippets of conversation. Coastal raids growing bolder. Pirates, they say, but not flying any known flag. Another Ottoman scout ship seen near Corfu. They're testing the edge again. Venetian fleet won't move before the season ends. Too many risks. It is nothing you can act on. Not yet. But you store it. And then at the final table you see him again. The man with eyes like yours, the janissary. He eats slowly, deliberately. Not like a starving man. Like a man who knows this might be his last meal for a long time. When he sets down his spoon, he lifts his gaze to yours. Not with surprise, as though he knew you were there. He says only one thing: I still remember the way to Preveza. Preveza. The name strikes you like a bell. Not because of the place itself, but because of what it represents. Waters once controlled by Ottoman admirals, now patrolled by Venetian scouts. A place whispered about among the rowers who believe some ships still harbor fugitives from Lepanto rebels who fled instead of surrendering. You nod, not to him, to yourself. That night, when you return to your cell, you find a small bundle tucked beneath the corner of the basin. Wrapped in oilskin is a coil of cord bowstring quality and 2 flint stones. Tools, not weapons, but enough to begin. You sleep with the bow grip beneath your head, and when morning comes, you do not look like a prisoner anymore. You look like someone remembering how to aim. The The morning breaks with the kind of stubborn grayness that seems unwilling to commit to either day or night, hanging low and indifferent above the sloped red roofs of the monastery. The light it offers is the sort that drains color from everything it touches, reducing the world to shades of ash and iron. Beneath this sullen sky, you rise once more, your joints cracking like dry reeds beneath your weight, your wound stiff, but no longer screaming a dull ache, now steady and constant, a reminder that your flesh still mends even if your freedom does not. Your breath fogs faintly as you step into the corridor. The cold has crept in during the night, uninvited and unapologetic, curling beneath the doorways and coiling around stone walls that seem somehow to sweat even in the absence of heat. It takes only a few seconds for the familiar sting of iron around your wrists to return. Today the manacles are tighter, or perhaps your wrists have grown thinner. Either way, the metal bites the same. You are not sent to the records room today, nor to the refectory where the steam of rotting cabbage and stale fish usually rises in thick waves from the cauldrons. Instead, a young monk, a novice by the look of him, with nervous hands and a mouth that twitches as if always rehearsing a prayer, leads you through an unfamiliar passage. His silence is deliberate, his steps too quick to be casual, too cautious to be innocent. You do not speak, but your eyes scan everything. The hall you're in now is narrower, the mortar between stones, newer, the scent of it tinged with lime, and something fainter oils perhaps. Beneath your feet, the stones are smoother worn, not by centuries of sandals, but by fewer, more deliberate shoes. The door he brings you to is wooden broad, reinforced by iron bands and flanked by two guards whose spears are ceremonial only in appearance. Their eyes are alert. One nods and opens the door without a word. Inside, the space opens into a small chamber, lit not by candles, but by sunlight, pouring in from a single circular window set high into the southern wall. Dust dances in the golden shaft like suspended stars, the only sign of movement in an otherwise frozen room. At its center stands a long table, unadorned, save for a single object placed precisely at its center. A bow, not a ceremonial one, not decorative. This is a weapon made for use. It is unstrung, but its curve is unmistakable recurve style Ottoman craftsmanship, the kind of bow that was once the pride of your regiment. Its grip is bound in dark leather, its limbs carved from alternating layers of wood and sinew, and even in rest, it radiates tension, as if it remembers the hundreds of arrows it once propelled into the air. The man standing beside it is unfamiliar to you, but his bearing is not. He is not a soldier, yet he moves like one who has studied them closely. His robes are finer than those of the monks, but they are also stained at the cuffs and frayed at the edges, as though their owner forgets to care for appearances when consumed by other matters. His eyes are a piercing gray framed by deep lines, and when he looks at you, it is not with curiosity or suspicion, but with recognition. Not of your face, but of your type. You were trained at Edirne, he says without preamble. His voice is low measured, each word carried with the weight of someone who assumes he is not often wrong. You say nothing. Your stance gives it away. He continues walking slowly around the table as though circling prey. The way your shoulders roll back when you're tense. The way you favor your right side even with an injured arm. Edirne archers are taught balance, but that balance becomes habit even when pain throws the body off center. Still, you remain silent. Finally, he stops across from you and places both hands on the table. There are fewer of your kind left than most people realize. The battle at Lepanto shattered many illusions, yours certainly and ours as well. But while admirals fight over coastlines and kings send letters, They won't read men like you still exist in the spaces between the maps. That's why I asked to see you. He gestures toward the bow. Do you still remember? Of course you do. You have remembered every day since you lost yours. You remember not just how to draw, but how to breathe through the draw. How to feel the pull of the string, not in your fingers, but in the center of your chest, as if every shot is not fired but released from somewhere beneath the ribs. You remember the silence that follows a perfect release, that half-second pause before the arrow finds its mark, when the world holds its breath. But instead of answering, you walk forward and extend your hands. He nods once and gestures to the guards who unshackle your wrists. The relief is immediate, though your skin stings where iron has peeled it raw. Still, your fingers close around the grip with instinct, and something ancient stirs in your body, something almost joyful. You test the bow's curve, its weight, and the fibers creak softly in response, alive, waiting. The man watches in silence. I am not offering you freedom, he says after a while. Let's be clear about that. No one here is interested in setting fire to the chains that hold this world together. But sometimes in the shadow of the law, a different kind of use is permitted. He reaches into a satchel and pulls out a small parchment map, sliding it across the table. There is a coastal caravan departing tomorrow, a supply run protected by mercenaries who barely know how to read their own contracts, much less follow them. Among the crates, there will be weapons, some legal, some not. There will also be ledgers. I need one of them. You raise an eyebrow. He smiles faintly, as if he expected your skepticism. I'm not a spy, he says, and this isn't a trap. Think of it as inventory correction. The Empire cannot afford to keep certain debts visible. The ledgers must be made to vanish before the right eyes find them. He nods at the bow again. You'll travel with the caravan as a bound escort, posing as an Ottoman prisoner being traded. No one will question the performance. Your arm will be unshackled only once the others have fallen asleep. Then you retrieve the ledger, return here by boat, and vanish. Or if you prefer, you take the boat and keep going. Your mouth is dry. Your thoughts race. This is madness. A setup. A gamble with your life. And yet what he offers choice is something you have not had in weeks, maybe months, perhaps even years if you think back far enough. You nod. He does not smile this time. He only reaches forward and places a single simple ring on the table iron plane, marked with a symbol you do not recognize, for the guard at the dock. Show him this and he will give you what you need. You are escorted back to your cell in silence, but the bow is not taken from you. It is wrapped in cloth and handed to you like an heirloom. You carry it not like a weapon, but like a memory. That night, you do not sleep. You sit on the edge of the stone bed bow beside you, the ring in your hand, and you listen. To the monk's footsteps, to the sea wind curling against the outer walls, to the sound of Luca snoring faintly down the hall. You do not know where he will be tomorrow. You do not know whether you will return, but you know what you must do. When the morning comes, veiled in the same gray shroud as the day before, you are led to the courtyard where the caravan is being prepared. 2 ox-drawn wagons, 3 guards dressed in mismatched armor, 1 sullen merchant chewing cloves to hide the stench of anxiety. You are shackled again, loose this time, and placed in the back wagon beside a crate marked for trade. Inside that crate you know is the ledger. The road out of the compound is narrow and climbs quickly into the cliffs, the wheels of the wagons screeching on the uneven stones. You look out across the coastline, jagged, brutal, defiant. And though the sea is nowhere in sight, you feel its presence still behind every gust of wind, beneath every breath of brine. You are on your way to make a choice, and this time, no empire will decide it for you. The path that unfurls before the caravan is neither scenic nor forgiving. tracing a serpentine trail along the crumbling spine of the coastline. It is carved not by engineers, but by centuries of hooves, wheels, and sandaled feet etched into the rock by repetition rather than design. To the left, cliffs rise like frozen waves, jagged and severe, casting long, shifting shadows that deepen with each passing hour. To the right, the land falls away in sharp drops toward the distant promise of sea, the view periodically obscured by the stubborn pines that cling to the stone with roots like twisted claws. Wind moans through these branches, tugging at the edges of cloaks and banners, carrying with it a scent that is equal parts brine smoke and the slow rot of leaves too long pressed into the earth. You sit motionless in the rear wagon, your back pressed against a slat of sun-warmed wood, the loose chain around your wrists deliberately arranged to appear more restrictive than it truly is. The shackles are real, of course, cold iron and lined with rust where they meet your skin, but the guard who fastened them left the hinge unlocked, a detail that marks your task as both sanctioned and dangerous. The bow, wrapped in oilcloth and strapped beneath the driver's bench, lies inches from your feet, its presence invisible to all but you. Each jolt of the wagon sends a thrum of vibration through the floorboards, a low rhythmic tremor that your bones interpret as something ancient and familiar. Drumbeat, heartbeat, war chant. Across from you, a merchant drowses beneath a hooded cloak that smells of wet hemp and vinegar, his head periodically bobbing forward before snapping upright in that perpetual twitch of the perpetually anxious. His breath smells faintly of cloves and wine gone sour, and a string of prayer beads dangles from his fingers. Their worn surfaces click together now and then in nervous succession. He has not spoken to you since you left the monastery gates. Whether this is due to fear, distaste, or mere indifference, you cannot say, but his silence is a gift you do not take for granted. Above and ahead, the lead wagon creaks around a bend, its canvas flapping like the wing of a wounded gull. One of the mercenaries, a grizzled man with a missing earlobe and a sword that sits awkwardly in his belt, as though unfamiliar with its owner, spits over the side and mutters a curse about the road. You don't catch the words, but the tone is universal frustration, laced with boredom, that dangerous middle ground where vigilance begins to rot. The other two guards appear marginally more competent. One walks beside the caravan eyes on the ridgeline, while the third rides a squat horse that clearly resents its rider. Even so, there is no sense of real discipline here. These men are not soldiers. They are placeholders filling a role until coin or consequence removes them from it. The sun climbs, then begins its slow descent without ceremony. By late afternoon, the road begins to dip toward a shallow valley, a bowl of dusty brush and sparse olive trees littered with the remnants of a long-forgotten skirmish. Scattered arrowheads gleam faintly in the dirt. A broken shield lies half-buried beneath a rock, its painted emblem so faded as to be meaningless. Even the crows that once fed here have moved on. The driver slows, instinctively wary of ambushes that no longer come. You shift slightly, adjusting your weight without drawing attention, and begin to assess. The timing must be precise. The ledger you were sent to retrieve lies within the crate at your side, locked and nailed, but not beyond your ability to open. The guards will camp soon, lulled by routine and the fatigue of false security. You will have one chance, perhaps two at most, to slip the shackle, retrieve the book, and vanish without alerting them. Failure means not only capture, but the end of whatever slim thread of purpose has held your days together. As the sun finally sinks behind the ridge, flattening into a smear of ochre light, the caravan halts in the valley. The lead driver dismounts, grumbling about wolves and bad luck, and sets about organizing camp. Tents are not erected. There is no point, but small fires are built from gathered twigs and brush, and food is distributed without ceremony. Dried figs, hard cheese bread, more stone than crust. You are not offered any, but neither are you watched too closely. To them, you are still just cargo. Night falls quickly here. The valley traps the cold, and soon your breath rises in thin silver streams with each exhale. The guards cluster around the largest fire, their conversation low, and meandering, touching on women they claim to have known, battles they pretend to have fought, and dreams they insist they no longer chase. The merchant curls into himself beside the wagon, murmuring a prayer in a dialect you barely recognize. He clutches a flask and drinks often, but not enough to forget you're near. You wait. When the conversation dwindles to grunts and the first guard begins to snore, you move. Slowly, carefully, you test the hinge. It gives with a soft click, barely audible beneath the crackle of dying fire. You pause. No movement, no alarm. You slide the shackle free and flex your wrist, grimacing as blood returns with needle prick urgency. Then, inching forward, you reach beneath the bench, retrieve the bundle, and unwrap the bow with reverent precision. Even in darkness, your fingers know its shape, its grain, the weight and tension of it. The string is coiled in your waistband. You thread it silently, pulling it taut, feeling the resistance, the tension, the readiness. You retrieve a single arrow, just one, tucked within the crate with the ledger hidden between parchment rolls. It was a gift left by the man in the monastery who never gave you his name. A gift or a message, you will need this. The crate itself opens easily. The lock is false, designed for show-not security. Inside, ledgers, maps, scrolls bound with ribbon and wax. You find the one marked with the seal you were told to seek, a serpent, swallowing its own tail, ringed by a circle of stars. You slide it free, place it in the oilcloth beside the bow. You could run, now, into the hills before anyone notices. The night is on your side, the guards drunk or dreaming. You could vanish into the cliffs, seek out the coast, pray that the boat waits as promised. But something pulls you back. Not loyalty, not obedience. Luca, you do not know why, but you cannot leave without knowing. With bow in hand and bundle slung across your shoulder, you move toward the fire. Not close, just near enough to catch a whisper. One of the guards stirs, mumbling something about the boy in the lower crate, the one they picked up from the monks, the baker's son, the one too weak to march. Just a trade, he mutters. Venice wanted labor for salt mines. Nothing worth noting. Salt mines. You do not flinch. Instead, you retreat. Quickly, silently slipping through the dark like mist. By the time the first guard wakes fully and glances around, the fire has burned low and your place is empty. You follow the road, not back the way you came, but sideways into the brush skirting the valley's rim. You move quickly now, fueled not by fear, but urgency. The ledger is safe. The task is complete. But the purpose has changed. The salt mines lie south, days from here, and you are no longer just a prisoner or an agent or a ghost. You are something else, an archer with one arrow, a boy's only chance. Dawn is nothing more than a slow blooming of silver-gray light across a sky still bruised with remnants of night. And as it spills reluctantly over the jagged ridges that cradle the coastline, you find yourself already moving through a landscape that feels as ancient and ambivalent as the war that brought you here. A world where the earth itself seems to conspire with the memory of forgotten battles. Every boulder like a discarded helmet. Every tree a leaning specter bearing witness to blood spilled long before your own was drawn. The bow is slung across your back beneath the folds of a rough traveling cloak borrowed from the crate, though nothing here is truly owned. and the ledger, tightly wrapped in oilskin and strapped to your waist, thuds lightly against your hip with every uneven step you take across the loose gravel and thin roots that wind like veins through this silent wilderness. A reminder that the task once given in whispers within the shadowed hall of a monastery has not yet been abandoned, only complicated by the addition of another thread, a boy whose face you cannot banish from your thoughts, whose fate has been reduced by others to a name in a margin and a value measured not in silver, but in salt. You descend from the high pass as the day unfolds, the cold morning air gradually giving way to the damp, heavy warmth of late autumn, the sun never quite breaking through the thick veil of clouds that linger like the breath of a god unwilling to speak. And as you move through thickets of olive and scrub pine skirting the broken remnants of an old Roman road, long since claimed by weeds and cracked by frost, you begin to see signs of habitation. Not the bustling signs of towns or even way stations, but the hushed evidence of movement, hoofprints half swallowed by dust, the faint imprint of a wooden wheel trailing through a puddle gone dry, and a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush, faded blue with a pattern you almost recognize, though from where or when you cannot say. Because in this part of the world, fabric outlives its owners, and stories are often passed down through the fraying of threads rather than the precision of tongues. Your destination, as murky as it seemed when first uttered, now begins to take shape in your mind with the slow, disjointed coherence of a dream. Returning after a long sleep, the salt mines near the mouth of the Drin River, or perhaps further south near the barren coastlines where Venetian contractors, Turkish speculators, and Slavic warlords vie for the privilege of extracting white crystals from black water, where laborers die not from violence, but from thirst and suffocation, and where boys like Luca, considered too frail for war, but too useful to waste, are shackled beneath the sun until their backs bow like saplings in wind, and their hands stiffen into claws from hauling brine-laden rock from pits that never empty, only deepen. You do not know the name of the camp where he was sent. Such places are rarely dignified with names, but you have learned in your brief, brutal education under captivity that supply caravans and guard patrols follow habits, even when orders do not, and that if you place yourself in the path of those patterns, something or someone will eventually lead you to the gate. By midday, the terrain begins to change, flattening into a hard-packed plain where the sea breeze no longer feels like a balm, but more like a warning, where the land itself gives off the faint sour tang of minerals pulled from deep underground, and where the horizon becomes a haze of indistinct grays punctuated by the occasional lean of scaffolding or a plume of smoke trailing from a chimney whose source remains unseen. You pass through the ruins of a village that was never built to last, rows of crumbling stone walls, doorways without doors, and a well whose water now reflects only the blank stare of the sky. And it is here, seated on the cold stone rim of that very well, that you allow yourself to rest for a moment, not out of exhaustion, but because your body, guided now more by instinct than logic, has determined that this is a place from which you must observe, must listen, must let the world unfold before deciding how and where to act. It is not long before your patience is rewarded. In the distance, perhaps half a mile west, following the worn track that leads from the interior toward the sea, you see the approach of a wagon flanked by mounted guards, 3 in number, their lances upright but slack in their grips, their cloaks whipping in the wind as the horses pick their way with practiced boredom across the dry ruts of the road. The wagon is modest, covered with canvas, pulled by a single mule, whose bones show clearly through its flanks. And though from this distance you cannot see the faces of those who ride within you, Note, with a tightening of the chest, that there is a second figure seated beside the driver, small, hunched, motionless. A boy. Your decision is immediate. You rise, collect your bow, and move with the silence of someone who has been forced by circumstance to understand how to become invisible, not by vanishing, but by merging, by dissolving into the background of a world too preoccupied with its own noise to notice what slips past the edges. You descend from the ruins and circle wide through the thickets, keeping low, counting every footfall, every rustle of wind through grass, every twitch of your fingers around the grip of the bow as you move to intercept the wagon, without alerting the escort that the landscape has suddenly grown more dangerous than it was the moment before. The trap when sprung is not elegant, but it is enough. From behind a cluster of rocks partially hidden by a fallen olive tree, you wait until the wagon draws near, until you can see clearly the cracked leather of the driver's boots, the frayed hem of the boy's tunic, the tired droop of the mule's ears, and then, with the efficiency of muscle memory sharpened by months of forced inaction, you notch your single arrow, draw the bowstring to your cheek, and loose. The arrow flies not to kill, not this time, but to sever. It slices through the reins with a crisp snap, startling the mule into rearing, and as the animal jerks to the side, the wagon careens off the track and topples partially into a ditch, sending the driver sprawling and the boy sliding into the dust. The guards react sluggishly, caught between confusion and disbelief, their lances rising belatedly as they scramble to assess the unseen threat. By the time they draw their short swords and dismount, you have already moved, darting from cover to cover. A ghost born from wind and brush your cloak, fluttering just enough to distract, but not to identify. You reach the wagon seconds before the guards do. The boy Luca is conscious, but stunned, blinking rapidly as he recognizes your face through a mask of dust and disbelief. You seize his wrist and pull him upright, whispering only one word: "Run," and he does. You follow, weaving through the gnarled undergrowth, ducking beneath low branches, your legs protesting with every stride, your lungs burning, not from lack of air, but from the sudden abundance of purpose. Behind you, the guards shout, one firing a crossbow bolt that embeds itself in a tree inches from your head, another crashing noisily through the brush in pursuit. But the terrain is yours now, wild, uneven, and filled with the same chaos that once ruled the battlefield, where you lost your freedom and now use to claim it back. You lose them by the time the sun dips toward the sea. You and Luca lie flat in a shallow ravine, your bodies pressed into the earth, hearts pounding like war drums in your ears. He is shaking, whether from fear or exertion you cannot tell, but his grip on your arm is firm, desperate, alive. "You came back," he whispers, and though you say nothing, you nod, once knowing that this moment, this narrow escape, this fragment of a life reclaimed, is the first true step towards something neither of you yet understand, but both believe might be possible. You are no longer an archer without arrows. You are no longer a number in a ledger. You are no longer a prisoner moving with the current of someone else's war. You are something new now, and though the world around you remains vast, cruel, and uncertain, you have done the unthinkable. You have drawn a line, and you have crossed it. The ravine offers no real shelter, only a depression in the earth, lined with crumbling limestone and the skeletal remains of last year's brush fires. But it is just deep enough to hide you from the sight lines of the men who now perhaps, for the first time in their professional lives, are realizing that they have failed to contain what they were paid to transport. The guards' shouting has faded into the distance, swallowed by the wind and the hush of dusk descending across the landscape. like a slow exhale. And as you lie motionless against the stony ground, with Luca curled beside you, his fingers still clenched tightly around the folds of your cloak, you feel not relief, but a cautious, strained stillness settle into your limbs, the kind of quiet that is not peace, but merely the absence of pursuit for now. You do not speak for several minutes, choosing instead to let the silence stretch out between you, allowing your pulse to slow and your breath to soften into the same rhythm as the shifting breeze that stirs the dry grasses overhead. The boy says nothing either, though you can feel the unspoken questions trembling just beneath his skin like trapped birds. Why did you come back? Where are we going? What happens now? And you understand that the weight of your decisions has only just begun to settle on the path ahead, stretching not just for you, but for the boy you've pulled from the margins of someone else's map. When you finally rise, your knees aching and your muscles stiff from the strain of sudden flight, Luca follows wordlessly. His expression blank, not from indifference, but from the shock of his world being upended twice in the span of as many days. You retrieve your bow from where you stashed it beneath the tangled roots of a thorn bush, brushing away dust and a single dried leaf that clings to the string like an afterthought. The ledger remains tied to your waist, heavy with the implication of unfinished business. And though the temptation exists to simply cast it into the nearest stream and vanish into the wilderness with the boy, you know that the man at the monastery, the one with the gray eyes and the voice like a blade drawn halfway, will not so easily forget a debt left unpaid. As you move carefully through the descending darkness, putting miles between yourselves and the road that once bore you toward captivity, you begin to construct in your mind a series of overlapping priorities, a careful lattice of obligations and contingencies that must be navigated if you are to survive more than a few nights beyond the reach of your former captors. You need shelter first and foremost, not just a cave or a thicket to crouch beneath, but a place where fire can be built and not seen, where wounds can be cleaned, where the body can be allowed to relax without the ears remaining tuned to every snapping twig or distant hoofbeat. Second, you need food. You have not eaten since dawn, and the exertion of your escape has burned through the meager reserves in your belly like a forge. Luca, though smaller and still young, looks pale beneath the grime that streaks his cheeks, and the way he stumbles every few steps tells you more about his condition than he ever will with words. Fortunately, the terrain begins to shift once more as the moon rises, casting a pale blue glow across the land that softens the harsher edges of rock and tree and allows you to move more quickly, more confidently. The ground slopes down toward a shallow gully where water once ran. Perhaps it still does somewhere deeper, and the shadows grow longer, thicker, more hospitable. Here, nestled between two leaning slabs of stone covered in moss and lichen, you find a natural hollow, partially concealed by fallen branches. It is not perfect, but it is hidden, and that is enough. You instruct Luca to gather what dry twigs he can find, showing him how to test their brittleness with a sharp twist of the fingers. And while he moves hesitantly about the perimeter, you clear the inner chamber of debris and set about preparing a fire pit, arranging the stones in a tight circle and hollowing out a depression for embers. The bow is laid carefully to the side, its string slackened slightly, and from your satchel you produce the flint stones given to you by the monk, whose name you never learned, a silent gift that now carries the weight of prophecy. When the fire finally sparks to life, casting its first tentative light against the surrounding darkness, Luca's face is illuminated for the first time since you pulled him from the overturned wagon, and you see with a dull pang just how much of his childhood has already been taken. His eyes too wide, too hollow, his cheekbones too sharp, his mouth set not in defiance, but in cautious gratitude. He is not yet broken, but he is close. You break a strip of dried meat into smaller portions, offering him the larger half. He hesitates at first out of politeness or uncertainty, but hunger soon overcomes manners, and he devours the food with the efficiency of someone who has already begun to learn that meals are opportunities, not rituals. When he finishes, he wipes his mouth with the back of his sleeve and looks at you across the fire, his gaze steady, now, his voice scratchy, but clear. "Why me?" he asks. It is not an accusation. It is the kind of question asked by someone who does not believe they are worth the cost of rescue. You do not answer immediately, and when you finally do, your voice is low, steady, carried on the rhythm of the flames. "Because someone should have done the same for me." He nods slowly and says no more. Later, after he has fallen asleep, with his back to the stone wall and the fire has burned down to glowing coals, you remain awake, listening to the forest beyond your hidden shelter, measuring the night by the sounds that come and go. The distant howl of a jackal, the rustle of a small animal through the underbrush, the whisper of leaves in the wind. You wonder what the monastery will do when the ledger fails to return. You wonder what the guards will report to their superiors. You wonder how long it will take before the silence you have created becomes too loud to ignore. And through it all, you wonder what to do next, because you know now that you cannot return, not to the monastery, not to the galleys, not to the life of a ledger-bound archer, waiting for his name to be crossed out by a clerk who will never know his story. You have stepped too far beyond the lines that once contained you, and the path you now walk bends away from empire and duty towards something murkier and perhaps more dangerous. Freedom, yes, but also purpose. At dawn, you and Luca set out once more, this time following not a road, but the course of instinct and memory, heading eastward toward the rising sun and the rumors you have gathered in snatches of overheard conversation, rumors of a fisherman's village that has quietly refused to declare for either crown or crescent, a place where deserters, traitors, and ghosts mingle beneath the same torn flags, and where coin still changes hands more easily than names. It is a long shot perhaps, but it is yours, and for the first time in what feels like years, you allow yourself the smallest flicker of belief, not in gods or rulers or flags, but in the thin, stubborn thread of survival that winds through every man who has ever rode beneath a lash, who has ever bled without praise, who has ever reached for a bow, even when the quiver held only one arrow. You are no longer just a relic of a war whose victors have already begun to rewrite its outcome. You are a wound that has not yet closed, and somewhere ahead, the next chapter waits. The road that now unfolds before you is not in any official sense a road at all, but rather a suggestion of passage, a faint depression in the wild growth of reeds and sun-bleached grasses, where cartwheels once rolled and boots once stomped, until the rhythm of footsteps wore a memory into the earth, a memory that, like yours, stubbornly persists despite time and neglect. You and Luca follow this half-forgotten trail with a cautious pace, each step measured not only by the terrain, but by the unknown that stretches ahead. For you are no longer walking within the ordered predictability of an empire's dominion, where every crossroad bore a standard and every rest station echoed with the bark of orders and the clank of uniforms. No, here in this liminal borderland between forest and saltstone and surf, you are traversing a place that belongs to neither Venice nor Istanbul, neither Pope nor Sultan, but to those who slip through the cracks, those who live in the echoes of conquest and the detritus of victory. The salt air reaches you before the water does a gradual change in the wind's taste that seeps into your throat and settles on your tongue with the faint sting of brine and rot, as though the very atmosphere has been steeped in tears too ancient to have names. The landscape around you changes with it, trees thinning into wind-warped skeletons, leaves curling inward from the constant push of sea breezes, stones dusted white with the residue of countless waves crashing and receding beyond the cliffs to the south. Overhead gulls wheel in great lazy circles, their cries not joyous, but raw and ragged, as though warning you that nothing beneath their circling shadows is ever truly still. You keep Luca close now, not out of fear for him, though that is part of it, but because the boy moves with a distracted energy, his eyes flicking toward every sudden sound and unexpected movement, a side effect of days spent in captivity and nights haunted by silence too loud to bear. He speaks little since your escape, though you suspect he has much to say, and when he does, it is in short utilitarian bursts. Look, animal tracks, or we should eat soon, or did you hear that? He never asks you where you are going or what comes next, and you are grateful for that because you do not yet have an answer. Still, a direction begins to take shape, not drawn on any map or carved into stone, but built from the convergence of memory rumor and the peculiar instinct that grips those who have once been hunted and now seek sanctuary, not in strongholds, but in forgotten harbors, places where loyalty is a matter of proximity, and trust is traded like salted meat, grudgingly, and only when there's no better choice. You are looking, you realize, for a name you once heard in the holding pens of the Venetian Galley. Stravilo, a fishing hamlet tucked into the northern edge of the Gulf, near where the limestone cliffs descend into tidal flats, and the marshes bloom with reeds tall enough to hide a man on horseback. Supposedly, the village declared itself neutral 3 times in as many years, swearing allegiance to whichever banner floated overhead that month, only to return to its quiet smuggling operations as soon as the soldiers left. You heard whispers then of deserters finding refuge there, Spaniards fleeing conscription, Ottoman debtors escaping their levies, even Greek monks who had grown tired of copying the same prayers into the same crumbling tomes. It might be nothing more than a myth passed between prisoners, the way fire is passed between stones in a storm. But it is enough. You need a harbor, and Stravilo is the first shape to rise from the fog. Your progress slows as the afternoon wanes and the marshes grow thicker. The ground beneath your feet becomes spongy soft with the seepage of tide and time, and your boots leave deep impressions that fill slowly with muddy water. Insects drone in the reeds, their voices a high, ceaseless dirge, and you are forced to move carefully now, navigating between patches of dry moss and tufts of grass where footing is less treacherous. Luca stumbles once, sinking nearly to his knee in a hidden pool, and though you pull him free without injury, the event marks him with a new wariness, his every step afterward placed with exaggerated care. It is nearing twilight when you spot the tower, not a tower in the grand sense, a fortress or lighthouse, or even a proper watchtower, but rather a crumbling column of stone set atop a low hillock, its original purpose lost to erosion, and its current state suggesting only that it once had a meaning no longer remembered. Around its base lie fragments of what might have been walls or dwellings, or simply the shattered skeletons of ambitions forgotten by their architects. Yet it is not the structure that commands your attention, but the fact that it is there at all, a sign of habitation of human hands, having shaped something and then abandoned it, which often means that others have returned to pick through its bones. You lead Luca toward the rise with caution, crouching as you ascend the final slope until you can see what lies beyond. Nestled into a hollow between the hills and the marsh is a cluster of buildings, half a dozen at most, constructed from driftwood clay and whatever stone could be pried from the ruins above. Smoke curls lazily from one chimney. Nets hang to dry between two crooked posts. A single boat, narrow and flat-bottomed, is tied to a stake near a channel that leads presumably to the wider bay beyond. You have found it Stravilo, or what remains of it. There is no sign of soldiers, no flags, no checkpoints or patrols. The place breathes with the uneasy rhythm of a community that survives not through law, but through mutual necessity. Each person likely knowing enough about the others to ensure quiet cooperation, but not enough to ever sleep deeply. You motion to Luca to stay hidden and descend alone, bow slung across your back, hands open at your sides. A woman greets you first. She appears from behind a shed, dressed in a tunic dyed with fish oil and seawater. Her sleeves rolled to the elbows, a knife in one hand and a fish in the other. Her eyes are dark, her face weather-beaten but young, and she does not flinch when she sees you, nor does she call out. Instead, she examines you the way one examines a tide-washed object, curious, cautious, waiting to determine whether you are useful or dangerous. "You're not from here," she says in a dialect that blends coastal Greek with a smattering of Turkish, slurred and smooth as wet clay. "No," you reply, "but I'm not looking to stay long." She nods once as though this is the only acceptable answer. "Who's the boy?" "Someone who needed a different ending." She studies your face for a moment, then gestures toward the largest hut. "You'll want to speak to the old man." He keeps track of those who don't want to be remembered. Inside the hut, the air smells of brine smoke and ink. The man seated behind the table looks up slowly as you enter, his beard thick and white, his skin like old parchment hands covered in ink stains and small scars. His left eye is cloudy blind perhaps, but the right is sharp, and it fixes on you with the intensity of someone who has lived long enough to know when he's being lied to. "You carry a ledger," he says before you've spoken. You do not ask how he knows. Instead, you place the oilskin bundle on the table. "I was told it mattered." He unwraps it with care as though revealing not pages, but memories. As he flips through the parchment, his mouth tightens and a muscle in his jaw flexes. "Names erased," he mutters. "Inventories corrected. Debts vanished." This is how they maintain peace. By forgetting. You do not correct him. You do not explain that you were a pawn in this exchange. You simply watch as he tears the ledger slowly in half, then again until it lies in tatters on the floor. "Then let us do the same," he says. Luca is brought in, fed, given a blanket and a place to sleep. You are offered none of these things, but you are not turned away. And in that you understand, this place does not offer comfort. It offers obscurity. And for now, that is enough. The days that follow your quiet arrival in Stravilo do not unfold with the sort of triumphal clarity one might imagine accompanying a hard-won escape or a long-anticipated liberation, but instead bleed into one another with the languid, sun-drenched lethargy of a place suspended outside the boundaries of empire and time, where hours are measured not by bells or orders, but by the lengthening of shadows on cracked stone walls, the angle of smoke drifting from clay chimneys and the soft, ceaseless murmur of the tide, lapping at the frayed ends of mooring ropes, pulling gently at skiffs that have seen more years at sea than the men who row them now. It is not that the people here welcome you with open arms. Indeed, many still eye you with the wariness of those who have learned often through betrayal that men who arrive without names and speak of old allegiances are usually the harbingers of trouble, but rather that they do not ask you to leave. And in a place like this, that quiet tolerance is as close to sanctuary as anyone can expect. You and Luca are offered shelter, not in a house, but in a lean-to. that leans a little more with each gust of wind, its roof patched with tarred sailcloth, and its floor made of sand that turns cold underfoot at night, but it serves its purpose. It keeps the wind off your backs, the rain out of your eyes, and most importantly, it gives you a space to breathe deeply, fully, in a way you have not allowed yourself to do since before you were first dragged in chains onto that cursed galley where your old life was broken and reshaped into something smaller, meaner, and hungrier. In the first mornings, you find yourself waking at dawn, not because there is a bell or a boot or a whip, but simply because the habit is burned into your muscles, and it takes time for the mind to trust that the absence of command is not a trick. You spend these early hours walking the perimeter of the village with deliberate slowness, allowing yourself to map its lines and rhythms, not as a scout would a man searching for weaknesses or escape routes, but as a wounded animal would trace the edges of a new den, alert to threat, but hoping foolishly perhaps for rest. You learn quickly that this place, though small, is fiercely self-contained, with its own economy of favors, its own currency of silence and obligation. The fishermen rise before the light, their nets slung over shoulders like serpents made of hemp and hope, and they return by mid-morning with boats heavy, not just with cod and mackerel, but with whispers who traded which Coast Guard ship passed too close, whether a new face at the market wore shoes too fine to belong to anyone born here. Luca adapts in his own way, quieter than before, more thoughtful, as if trying to disappear into the patterns of life here without fully committing to them. He assists an old salt-eyed man named Costa, who teaches him in fits of irritation and unexpected tenderness how to gut fish, how to seal jars with oil, how to spot spoiled meat by smell alone. The boy takes to these tasks not with joy exactly, but with a grim resolve, the kind that comes from knowing that usefulness is its own kind of armor in places where charity wears out quickly. Sometimes you see him standing on the dock alone, staring at the far horizon with a look that reminds you of yourself at his age, uncertain whether the sea is a path to something better or merely a vast wet wall blocking everything that came before. For your part, you are given the task of tending to the edge of the village, reinforcing the old barriers meant to discourage wolves and thieves, patching gaps in the fence line where rot has crept in or storms have broken through. It is not glamorous work, nor is it particularly strategic, but it provides something you hadn't realized you craved until you began to do it, the opportunity to mend rather than destroy, to build with your hands, instead of draw them back from a bowstring, to shape wood into something that will keep others safe, even if only from the elements or the hunger of desperate men. The village does not pay you for this, nor do you ask, and in time that quiet labor earns you a kind of recognition. A nod at the morning water well, a mended coat left outside your shelter, a half loaf of bread wrapped in waxed cloth and set where you would find it, though no name accompanies the offering. It is during one such morning, as you are repairing a section of fencing where a mudslide has uprooted the posts and scattered the reeds woven between them, that the first true sign of change arrives, not in the form of soldiers or ships, but as a whisper carried on the boots of a traveler who arrives not by road or sea, but from inland through the forest path that few bother with anymore. He is a lean man, wrapped in a cloak, too fine for the weather, and carrying a satchel too light for someone journeying alone. And when he appears at the edge of the village, he is neither greeted nor challenged, merely watched. You are among those who watch, squinting into the morning glare, as he speaks briefly with the old man who manages what passes for records here, and though you cannot hear what is said, you recognize immediately the stiffness in his stance, the way his eyes scan the settlement, not with curiosity, but with calculation. Later you are summoned. The old man does not ask. He simply says he knows you, and gestures toward the far end of the harbor, where the stranger now sits with a cup of boiled wine, staring into the water, as though trying to find something lost beneath its surface. When you approach, the stranger does not rise, nor does he speak immediately. He lets the silence stretch long enough to become discomfort, then turns and smiles, not the kind of smile that reaches the eyes, but the kind that suggests amusement laced with warning. I was told, he begins, his voice smooth and low, that an Ottoman archer with a monk's ledger and a tendency to vanish was here. And now I find you looking very much like someone trying not to be found. You say nothing because there is nothing to be gained by confirming what he already knows. He continues, I come with no orders, no warrant, no flag, just an offer or perhaps a warning depending on how you choose to hear it. He pauses, sipping the wine. The ledger you stole, do not worry, I am not here to retrieve. It has caused discomfort. Some debts were meant to be forgotten, but now they have been remembered. Certain names that were meant to vanish have been whispered again, and certain men do not like being remembered. You study him now, noting the way his fingers drum the cup, the ring on his right hand, simple iron worn smooth, an agent clearly, whose you cannot tell. Perhaps it doesn't matter. You have a choice, he says at last. Remain here in this place that forgets everything, including you, or come with me. There are others who remember you differently, who see use in a man with your past. He stands, brushing dust from his cloak. I'll return in 3 days. If you are here, I will know your answer. And then he leaves, vanishing into the same trees from which he came, and the silence he leaves behind is heavier than his presence. That night you sit by the fire with Luca, who now speaks more freely, though still cautiously. Are we going to stay? He asks, not looking at you, his voice barely above the crackle of the flames. You do not answer immediately, because the truth is you do not know. You are tired, bone deep, marrow hollow, tired, but you are also not finished. You thought escape was the end of the story, but now you realize it was only the beginning. The morning after the stranger's visit breaks slowly over Strovilo with a pale light that filters through the sea mist and fog in long, dissolving fingers, casting the world in hues of worn pearl and shadowed blue, as if the village itself has drawn a breath and held it unsure whether to speak or vanish. The wind carries a low, constant hush from the sea, not the sharp gusts of a storm, nor the clean breezes of open waters, but the slow, grinding exhale of tides meeting stone of waves, repeating secrets worn into the coastline of time, marking the edges of a place that has always existed between maps and memories. You step out from the lean-to before Luca stirs boots pressing into sand that still holds the night's chill, and you walk with the kind of careful stillness that does not seek stealth, but balance and awareness that every movement, now, every word spoken or left unspoken, is part of the slow tightening coil of a decision that has not yet fully revealed its shape. Your hands, though scabbed and roughened by weeks of escape and labor, move fluidly as you adjust the bow across your shoulder fingers, testing the cord and grip. Not because you expect violence today, but because readiness has become a part of your body, as intrinsic as the breath you draw, or the rhythm of your own footfalls on uneven ground. You do not walk with haste toward the edge of the village, where the path leads down into the marsh and eventually disappears into the reeds that separate land from water, but you move with purpose. Nonetheless, threading your way past nets left out to dry, and the hollow carcasses of boats being patched or abandoned, passing no one except an old woman pouring water over herbs strung on a clay wall, and a barefoot boy dragging an empty fish basket behind him with the listless energy of early morning labor. The sky for the moment is clear above the horizon, though streaks of distant cloud already threaten to obscure the sun before it can rise too high, and the temperature promises to stay cool. The kind of air that settles deep in the lungs and makes every thought feel sharper, every doubt more insistent. You reach the ruins above the village, what remains of an old lookout tower, perhaps Roman, perhaps older still, and sit atop the broken stone rim of what was once a foundation, looking out over the inlet, where the sea churns gently in a bowl of rock and wind. From here, the village appears almost peaceful, the kind of peace that might fool someone into thinking it could last, and for a few minutes you allow yourself to believe it too. To imagine that you and Luca might disappear completely into this place, that no one will come asking again, that the stranger's arrival was only a flicker of the outside world, fading out as quickly as it had flared. But you know better. You have seen too many fires that pretended to die only to return in ash and breath. The choice the stranger offered was not a path to safety, but a return to purpose, a knife wrapped in silk, a mission dressed as mercy. You were not offered freedom. Not truly. You were offered a role, a new place in a shadow war that plays out not in battles or cities, but in ledger books and whispered allegiances where the difference between a man and a message is only how far he is willing to run before the ink dries. And yet, part of you cannot deny the lure, the throb of unfinished motion in your limbs, the knowledge that somewhere beyond this inlet, beyond the driftwood huts and tired villagers, the world is still turning, still consuming, the forgotten like waves, swallowing stones. Luca finds you there, just as the sun begins to pull free from the horizon's grip. His eyes still heavy with sleep, but his stride deliberate, not hesitant. He sits beside you, without speaking the way he has learned to do an unspoken acknowledgement, that the silence between you often speaks more clearly than words. I saw him, he says finally after a while. The man in the cloak, the one who came yesterday. You nod, keeping your gaze on the sea. He talked to the old man, said he'd come back in 3 days. Again you nod. Luca pulls his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them, and rests his chin on the coarse fabric of his sleeves. Are you going with him? The question lingers, not because it is unexpected, but because you have not yet allowed yourself to form the answer. Not allowed, not even in your own mind, with the kind of precision such choices demand. You close your eyes for a moment and listen, not to Luca, not to the waves, but to that quiet place inside yourself, where direction begins, where instinct and memory combine into something close to clarity. You remember the galley, the weight of the oar, the salt in your wounds, the way the ship breathed like a beast beneath your feet. You remember the monastery, the books that told no truth, the blind scribe, the way your name was written and crossed out and written again. You remember fire and chains, the boy's face smeared with dust, and tears, the single arrow that flew not to kill, but to sever, to signal. You open your eyes. I don't know, you say, and the words spoken at last settle into the morning air like stones dropped into still water. The boy says nothing, but after a long pause he offers, "If you do, I want to come." You turn to him, then studying his face not for signs of bravado or fear, but for the truth that lies somewhere between them, the truth of a child who has lived too long in the care of men who made him small and now sees in you not just a rescuer, but something to follow. And this is the cruel part of choice, not that you must risk yourself, but that you may end up shaping another's fate with your own. You're still a boy, you say, but gently. So were you, he replies, and you cannot argue. That day you spend your time helping repair one of the village's old salt storage sheds, patching cracks in the clay walls with a mixture of sand and crushed seashells, while the sun climbs briefly above the clouds, illuminating the workers around you in a golden light that makes them seem, just for a moment, like figures from an older world, carved from stories rather than shaped by history. You work without complaint, but with a kind of watchfulness, as if every task is a preparation, a rehearsal for something that has not yet begun, but already looms on the edge of possibility. In the afternoon, word spreads of a new boat spotted on the far side of the bay, low-hulled, unflagged riding with too much ballast for fishing. The villagers do not panic, but their eyes grow sharper, their movements more economical. That night, no fires are lit above ankle height. On the second day, the stranger does not return. You know he will on the third. You and Luca spend the night sharpening old fish hooks into arrowheads, just in case, because the choice when it comes will not be made in words. It will be made in motion. And when that moment arrives, you must not hesitate. Not again. The third morning arrives, not with the hush of dawn or the slow unveiling of sunlight filtering through mist and tree branches, but with the low groan of shifting weather, the kind that speaks through the air before the sky has fully changed, a pressure deep within the chest and beneath the ribs that heralds not only wind, but the possibility of something more storm upheaval, or the kind of silence that often comes just before chaos. From the moment you open your eyes, you feel it in the coolness that has sunk deeper into the sand under your lean-to, in the stillness of the birds, in the way the clouds seem to crouch instead of drift. It is not fear, not yet, but it is anticipation, and it clings to everything like salt to skin. Luca is already awake when you rise, seated near the embers of the previous night's fire, his legs drawn up, his arms wrapped around his knees, in a position you have seen him adopt many times over the past weeks, a defensive posture, one born not of immediate threat, but of long-practiced vigilance. He does not speak as you join him, nor do you break the silence with words of false reassurance or idle speculation. The boy has earned more than that. He deserves not the comfort of platitudes, but the dignity of truth, even when that truth remains unspoken. Together, you share a simple meal of dried lentils and charred bread left too long in the coals, the kind of food that does not nourish so much as sustain, the kind of food that speaks of travel, of movement, of choices waiting just beyond the horizon. When it is finished, you rinse your hands in seawater and sling your bow over your shoulder, not with urgency, but with the solemn finality of a man who knows that today is not like the days before. The village is unusually quiet, though it is not yet early. Children do not play between the huts, and the older men do not squat near the boats, mending nets, as they have each morning since your arrival. You pass a woman with two baskets slung over her back, one filled with fish heads, the other with briny herbs, and though she nods at you, there is something in the way her eyes narrow, in the way she continues walking without a word, that confirms what you already sense they know. They may not know exactly who the stranger was, or what he said to you, or what decision now twists itself like a slow-growing vine around your lungs, but they know the shape of departure, the tension that comes before the breaking of a bond, however temporary or hesitant it may have been. They have seen too many men come through this village with secrets written behind their eyes and leave with stories they will never tell. You will be no different, not to them. You were never meant to stay. You head to the high rocks again, taking the steep path that curls around the rear of the ruins, where broken walls still wear the ghostly imprints of what might once have been carvings, and where lichens have claimed every exposed surface with the slow, tenacious grip of time's indifference. The wind has picked up by the time you reach the top, tugging at your cloak and sending loose strands of hair across your eyes. But it is not a wild wind. It is the kind that precedes something larger, as if the world itself is waiting for someone to speak first. The stranger stands there already, his figure tall and motionless, silhouetted against the pale gray shimmer of the bay below. He does not turn when you approach, nor does he greet you, and for a long while, you remain a few paces behind him, letting the distance hold the space for all that remains unsaid. When at last he speaks, his voice is nearly lost to the wind. "There is a ship anchored just beyond the mouth of the gulf," he says, gesturing with one gloved hand toward the vague smudge of shadow on the horizon, a dark speck that might be a vessel or merely a trick of the light. It will wait until nightfall. After that, it will leave, with you or without. You say nothing. He turns now, and for the first time, you see the wear on his face. Not just age, but fatigue of a deeper kind, the erosion of too many years spent navigating the murk of half-truths and buried motives. His eyes, though still sharp, are ringed with the shadow of decisions made on behalf of men who never paid the price for them. There are names on a new list, he continues, voice steady, some you may recognize, some that are still being written. Your task would be simple: intercept, observe, correct. You would not work alone. You stare past him toward the thin line of the surf breaking against the curve of the coast, the foam glowing faintly beneath the overcast light, a reminder of motion even in stillness. You do not ask the obvious questions: who leads this mission? What is its cause? Whose authority it represents? Because you know the answers are irrelevant. You are being offered a role, not a reason. When you finally speak, your voice is quiet, almost lost to the wind. And the stranger's expression does not change. His presence is not required, he says, nor advised. A pause. You have done your part in his story. The implication hangs heavy in the air, and you know its weight is deliberate. You saved him once, broke chains. For him, killed for him, bled for him. But that salvation, like most, was never meant to be permanent. Luca was a choice, made in a moment of fire and flight, not a life sworn. Still, the idea of walking away from him now, of leaving him in this place to become one more forgotten child among hundreds, fills you not with guilt, but with a cold kind of dread, the sense that something essential would be lost, not just in him, but in you. I gave him more than a name, you say, finally turning to face the stranger fully. He gave me more than a reason. The stranger studies you. I won't stop you, he says. But if you bring him, you will always be looking over your shoulder. Then so be it. He does not argue. He nods once and departs without another word, his cloak catching the wind as he disappears down the slope, heading for the narrow path that leads to the inlet, where a skiff waits to ferry him back to the larger vessel, where the men who remember your name or your number have left a place open not for you exactly, but for the version of you they believe still exists. When you return to the village, dusk is beginning to gather in the corners of the sky, curling into the clouds like ink bleeding into water, and the wind carries the promise of rain. Luca is waiting for you by the lean-to, arms-crossed expression, set not in fear, but in defiance. And before you even speak, he says, "You don't need to explain." You shake your head, "But I will." And so by the light of a small, stubborn fire, you tell him what was offered. Not everything the stranger's language was precise, and you do not repeat it, but enough. Enough for Luca to know that the sea is once again calling, and that it is not calling him. "I want to go," he says immediately. You expect it. You have prepared yourself for it. But still hearing it out loud from his lips with that mixture of urgency and pain drives the air from your lungs. "You don't know what's waiting," you say. "I know what's behind," he replies, "and you understand." That night, You pack not in haste, but with the slow, methodical patience of men who have learned to travel light and survive long. The village does not bid you farewell. The old man in the hut where the ledger was burned does not rise to speak. The woman who once gave you a loaf of bread leaves nothing more outside your shelter. But when you pass the edge of the dock, Costa, the old fisherman who taught Luca to clean cod and spot rot by smell alone, hands the boy a wrapped cloth without a word. Inside are 2 dried fish and a small blade carved from whalebone. It is enough. You reach the inlet just before full dark. The skiff is there. The ship waits beyond a black silhouette against the navy blue sky, its lanterns unlit. You look at Luca. He nods. Together you step into the boat and push off. The sea, when met again after so long, does not greet you with a fanfare of crashing waves or a jubilant dance of dolphins slicing through moonlight, but rather with the kind of solemnity that only ancient things possess, a vast breathing canvas of slow movement and low murmurs, broken only by the faint lap of oars pulling rhythmically through the dark water and the occasional creak of wet wood expanding in the salt air. The skiff that bears you and Luca glides soundlessly across the inlet, its silhouette a ghost against the velvet blue sheen of the sea. Its pilot an old man cloaked in oilskin, and silence saying nothing as he rows with the methodical cadence of one who has ferried too many men across too many thresholds. Each departure folded into the next until the act of delivering others to their uncertain fates has become indistinguishable from memory itself. The ship awaiting you larger than you expected, with a hull that gleams like damp obsidian beneath the faint shimmer of starlight, is anchored just beyond the current's reach, its masts rising like shadowed spears against the sky, sails furled and motionless flags withheld. There are no identifying marks, no colors of allegiance, no name painted across its side to signal intent or origin. And in that anonymity lies its true nature. A vessel not of empire, but of silence. A ship that sails not under the orders of kings or sultans, but for the purposes of those who dwell beneath the surface of treaties and borders, who pass from port to port like shadows unnoticed, unless sought deliberately and feared when found. As the skiff draws closer, you hear the low call of a whistle. 2 notes, quick and sharp, answered by a single thump of rope against wood from the deck above. A ladder is dropped swaying faintly above the waterline, and the old man steadies the boat with one hand while gesturing silently toward the rungs with the other. You climb first, boots slipping once against the damp hemp, and as your fingers grip the edge of the deck, you are pulled upward by unseen hands, your body lifted with a force that speaks more of necessity than welcome. Luca follows smaller and quicker, and the moment his feet touch the planks, the ladder is hauled up and the skiff is already drifting back into the dark, its pilot vanishing into the night without a backward glance. The deck of the ship is dimly lit by shielded lanterns, their light amber and low, casting the scene in a flickering chiaroscuro of long shadows and sharp glints of metal. The men who stand before you, 6 in total, are dressed not in uniform, but in the mismatched garments of travelers and tradesmen, wool coats patched with waxed linen sashes of faded crimson or ink-black silk boots scuffed by years of land and sea. Yet despite their lack of matching insignias, there is a cohesion in their stance, in the way they carry their weight evenly on the balls of their feet, in the manner their eyes do not wander, but hold fast to every movement within their sphere, that tells you plainly they are soldiers of a kind, the kind that does not need armor to kill or orders to act. From among them steps the man you had spoken to on the cliff, the stranger in the fine cloak, now without pretense. He no longer smiles. His expression has hardened into something more elemental, a fusion of steel and command, and though he says nothing at first, his gaze moves from you to Luca, and back again. not with surprise, but with the cold calculation of a chess player presented with an unexpected piece returned to the board. "This is not a place for children," he says, not cruelly, but as a statement of undeniable truth. "He's not a child." You reply, voice steady, though your throat is dry from the salt air and the weight of what has not yet been spoken. "Not anymore." A long silence follows, broken only by the soft groan of the hull shifting in the current and the creak of the ropes above as the sails whisper faintly against their bindings. The stranger studies you for a moment longer, then turns, walking toward the aft of the ship without another word. A nod from one of the others gestures you to follow, and you do, leading Luca by the shoulder, your steps echoing on the planks like the first bars of a song neither of you yet knows the tune of. Below deck, the corridor is narrow and dim, lined with crates bound in rope and sealed with wax, their labels written in several languages, none of which speak plainly. The stranger leads you into a low-ceilinged chamber near the stern, where a table sits beneath a lantern swinging from a rusted chain, and maps are spread across its surface like the skin of a slain beast. Coastlines traced in fine ink marked with red points and hastily drawn arrows. Trade routes twisted into knots of uncertainty. He motions for you to sit. "You are here," he says, pointing to a spot near the southern coast of the Adriatic, close to where Stravilo would be, if it were deemed significant enough to appear on such a chart. There, he continues, dragging his finger toward a series of islands to the west, is where your name first crossed a page not meant for men like you to see. And here he circles a harbor unnamed, but familiar in shape, is where the next page must be corrected. You lean forward, eyes tracing the points he indicates, trying to read between the lines for the mission he has not yet named. Beside you, Luca watches in silence, his eyes wide, but unreadable, the map, a puzzle whose stakes he understands, even without knowing the language. "There is a man," the stranger says. "He once held a key, literal, and otherwise, to the vault where certain ledgers are kept. But he disappeared 2 months ago, taking more than memory with him. We believe he has re-emerged in this port under a new name, surrounded by those who prefer him hidden." He places a small object on the table, an amulet carved from bone and dyed red, with a pattern that makes your stomach twist with the memory of the monastery, the ink-stained man, the moment your own name was almost lost. "Find him," he says. "Learn what he remembers. Take what must not be remembered." You know what this means. This is not retrieval. This is erasure. You nod slowly but not without hesitation. "And the boy," you ask again, softer. The stranger looks at Luca for a long moment, then back to you. "He can stay here," he replies. "He can learn the ropes, work the deck. If he proves trustworthy, he may earn a place. If not," he doesn't finish the sentence. "He doesn't need to." You look to Luca, who meets your gaze without flinching. "I'm staying," he says, firm. You take a deep breath and let it out slowly, nodding once more, this time to both of them. "I'll leave at first light." That night, sleep comes slowly, not because of fear, but because of the quiet. The kind of quiet that only a ship at anchor in open water can provide, a stillness interrupted only by the soft slap of waves and the distant cries of night birds. You lie in a narrow berth, staring up at the wood above, and listen to Luca's breath settle into its slow, even rhythm in the bunk across from yours. You think of chains and oars, of ledgers and arrows, of names written and crossed out of fire, and salt and wounds that never quite heal. You think of what must be done, and you do not flinch, because you are no longer simply a survivor. You are a man with a task, a wound sharpened into a weapon, a memory that refuses to fade. And tomorrow, you will draw the bow once more, not for vengeance, not for justice, but for silence. Because in a world ruled by forgetting, remembering is the most dangerous act of all. As the ship drifts deeper into the folds of the night, its lanterns dimmed to amber glows, and its sails furled like sleeping wings, the world begins to shrink into softness. The sea, no longer a place of trial, but a companion of rhythm and breath, rocks the vessel gently, as though cradling old wounds and weary hearts in a long-forgotten lullaby. The wood creaks beneath your back, steady and warm from the touch of countless footsteps, and overhead the sky has cleared just enough to reveal the slow shimmer of stars scattered like ash across indigo silk, distant, ancient, and entirely unconcerned with the lives unfolding far below. You let your eyes rest not closed, but half-lidded, the way a soldier might sleep after the war has ended. But the dreams have not listening to the slow inhale of the tide and the small familiar stirrings of the boy nearby. His breath steady now, his shape silhouetted against the bulkhead like a shadow that belongs. The wind no longer carries orders or alarms, only the salt of the sea, the whisper of memory, and the faint scent of pine pitch and canvas. You feel your muscles uncoil, not in surrender, but in the first stages of peace. A fragile peace, perhaps, but peace nonetheless. And as the ship slides onward into the dark, carrying names no one will speak, and stories no scroll will record, you surrender. For this moment, not to duty, not to vengeance, but to stillness. Let the sea remember what the world forgets. Let the silence hold what cannot be spoken. And let your breath rise and fall with the waves soft, slow, and unbroken. Tomorrow can wait. For now, you are safe. You are drifting. You are home.